Thanks for being here. My name is Bridget Helms. I'm Executive Director at Miller Center for Social Entrepreneurship. And this is a Skoll Forum panel on women's economic empowerment. It's part of the Skoll World Forum's Ecosystem Day and is completely hosted and curated by Miller Center for Social Entrepreneurship. Please use the chat feature to ask questions, and we'll be responding to questions as we go. We're hoping to actually generate an interesting discussion here, not just among the panelists, but also among yourselves as well. Yeah, and we will have lots of time to address questions and discussion points towards the end of the session. So before we get going, I'd just like to talk a little bit about how Miller Center thinks about women's economic empowerment and the role that social entrepreneurship can play in advancing women's economic empowerment. You know, oftentimes when we think about women or gender lens investing or women's economic empowerment, we immediately go to the women founders, and that is certainly a super important piece. And especially because we're all very aware of how difficult it is for women to get access to the capital they need to grow their businesses. I mean, this is a well-known fact. It happens around the world. It's also happening here in Silicon Valley. Something like, you know, less than 3% or 4% of venture capital goes to women founders, even here in the US, and the statistics are not that much different around the world. So that's a serious issue that I would like to address later on. And women as founders, I think, is a really important piece. However, the way that we like to look at it at Miller Center is very much a sort of 360, or sometimes I call it the north, south, east, and west kind of approach to women's economic empowerment. Women as leaders for sure, and then women as customers, getting access to products and services that they need to improve their lives. Women as employees, so how do we think about and treat the women working in our organizations? How do we recruit more women, et cetera? And then women in the value chain. How do we source from women-owned businesses or artisans or something like that, and also in the distribution channel. So really taking that broad perspective, thinking about all the different ways that social entrepreneurship can advance women's economic empowerment. And to that point, I have with me today an illustrious panel, and we're all together because we are just wrapping up the first in residence accelerator that we have had since the beginning of the pandemic, actually since August 2019. So we've been here together with 24 entrepreneurs from 16 enterprises from 9 countries around the world. And we're so lucky to be able to do this panel as an actual panel, and, and not, you know, as squares in a screen. Yes, exactly. Squares in a screen. So we're very excited about that, and hopefully you will enjoy the conversation as much as we will, because I know we will. Okay, so let me just quickly introduce the panelists, and then I'll ask each of you to just say a few words about the business that you run. And, you know, just kind of the scope of the business and what it's about. And then we'll talk more in depth later about the kind of dimension of women's economic empowerment that you're working on. So we have Eka Mesiona from Equitable in the Philippines. And we have Anya Lim from Anthill Fabric. Anthill Fabric Gallery is the full name, right? Yes. Okay. Also from the Philippines. And we have Shantanu Pathak, who is the founder of Care Mother. And we'll hear a little bit more about each of those businesses. But maybe let's hear from you first, Shantanu. Can you tell us a little bit about Care Mother?
Yeah, thank you. And so happy to be part of this forum. I was really thrilled with the topic of the panel and I jumped on it.
Mhm.
The reason at Care Mother we particularly work on pregnancy care. The whole idea of ensuring that we deliver quality pregnancy care is to ensure that the women as well as the next generation have, assured quality of life. This double effect is so much required. And at Care Mother, we realize technology can help to achieve that. So we empower frontline women health workers. Of course, do not discriminate women or men, but we empower the frontline workers. Most of them are women. We have gynecologists who are using our products, and again, majority of them are women. So definitely, excited to be part of this panel. And just to say in a couple of lines, Care Mother build technologies for healthcare providers to provide care at doorstep in last mile, early identify high-risk pregnancies, and ensure that there is a timely referral to prevent maternal mortality and morbidity.
That's great. So you work in India? What
Yeah.
part of India? And can you give us a little bit of sense of like how many,
Sure.
doctors or households or what your impact has been?
Yeah, Care Mother primarily work in India. We have more than 1,000 healthcare providers across 20 states of India using our products. We have created a sustainable engagement of around 100,000 pregnant women annually, which I'm sure it will increase. Recently, we also finished our pilots in Nigeria, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan.
Oh,
So
okay.
yeah, and
Great.
honestly, it was a very great experience to learn different cultural aspects, and Care Mother could demonstrate that if you empower frontline workers irrespective of geographies with the right technology, take cultural aspects, we can have a potential impact.
Very interesting. Very well. We're going to get
Yeah.
a lot more into that. Thank you so much. Okay, so Anya, let's hear from you.
Right. So Anvil Fabric Gallery, we're based in Cebu, Philippines, but we work across the country and represent like rural, urban, and indigenous communities. So basically what we do is we support the different weaving and craft artisans across the country and ensure sustainable livelihood through providing market access and by applying the weaves in contemporary design, like this beautiful traditional blouse that I'm wearing. But we also go beyond that because women economic empowerment is really at the heart and the core of what we do. So beyond just market access, we provide capacity building and ensure that the artisans gain entrepreneurial skills and mindset so that they can become self-reliant.
Okay,
Yeah.
very cool. Very interesting. Yeah, I want to dig into that a little more as well. Can you talk a little bit more about like the reach or the kind of impact that you've managed to have so far?
Yeah, so for the past decade, we've worked with over 750 artisans. Again, this is varied. Like we work with indigenous communities, urban communities, and rural communities. And I think that really makes our work interesting and dynamic because we get similar to Shantanu, like we're able to really be sensitive to the cultural context and the locality of the artisans that we work with. And this has impacted over 3,750 lives, given the number of households that these women take care of.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Eka, let's hear about Equitable.
Yeah, so Equitable is a financing platform for smallholder farmers. We work with over 2,100 smallholders in the Philippines, 40% of whom are women. And really our work is really connecting farmers to affordable sources of capital. But we also recognize that a lot of the work in agriculture is like women do a lot of informal work in agriculture. And so we think that by investing in these women, right, or even just acknowledging the fact that they actually have a bigger role when it comes to farming. It's just that in the statistics will tell you that there are more men in the agricultural sector, but women are actually doing a brunt of the work by being with them and being part of the farming household.
Right. That's so, I hadn't thought of that, but that's really an interesting dimension as well. So what's fascinating about these three companies, in my mind, is that you're working in three completely different verticals, right? You've got the healthcare, you've got the retail, you've got the agriculture. And it's fascinating to see some of the themes that are already starting to emerge as being, sort of common themes. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is, can you go a little deeper? You heard me at the beginning talk about the kind of 4 dimensions. Let's leave the women as leaders a little bit to the end, because I do definitely want to connect with the 2 of you. And I know you have a female co-founder as well, so you might have some views on that. But let's talk about the other 3. So women as customers, women in the value chain, and women as employees. Can you just sort of discuss which of those are the most relevant for your business and how you approach it? How about, let's start with you.
Right. So because we work with artisans, they are at the heart of our value chain, obviously. And Anvil also really is in the business of value creation. From the get-go, it's so important that the women are part of our decision-making process. So the way we have kind of worked around ensuring that we have a platform that is inclusive for women is to make sure that from the start of the conversation, they're part of it. It's very participatory. And the programs that we build around our community enterprise development is really co-designed with them. So we actually shifted the narrative and the way we facilitate this. Instead of conducting a needs assessment wherein the narrative begins negatively. They start talking about their problems and their issues and their challenges. Instead, we do an appreciative inquiry and do an assets assessment. And then the narrative shifts and they start discovering their full potential, their resources, their talents, their dreams. And that alone creates a huge shift. And it also facilitates increased ownership of the program. So that the program alone is what really kind of makes them part of the entire ecosystem and what really highlights their role in the ecosystem. So throughout the way we do it is we don't necessarily influence their designs because the indigenous patterns of these fabrics are their own, but we have interventions around what's relevant to the market in terms of colors and the seasonal colors. And with the pricing or with ensuring that there's fair wage, we ensure that they learn about like proper time and motion, so they understand what goes into the costing process. And these things are learned. So another aspect of the program is our master and apprentice program, where our master weavers, we augment their income by 20% with a condition that they actually train an apprentice. And that addresses the gap in cultural continuity. So in this process, it's like women helping other women also, but also being able to feel that they're part of a holistic community that elevates their enterprise and their tradition.
It's what you're saying is really interesting because we've written a number of articles and a white paper on this topic. And one of the hypotheses that we had is that for those companies that have women in the value chain, the way you're describing, that it would be not only that from a kind of economics perspective or a business perspective, but also empowering them and treating them with respect and dignity and helping in a broader way. And that's what's different from, when we're talking about a social enterprise versus kind of a more standard enterprise. So it's, yes, providing the economic opportunity, but all of these other things that you wrap around are also really special.
And I wanted to add, like, coming into the community, a lot of the women were very vulnerable in terms of opportunities because obviously in the past, they didn't see the value of their craft. And a lot of them were already tempted to like migrate in urban areas or seek greener pastures abroad and disrupt the family dynamic. So that alone is so essential. And with our partnership and with them feeling their value in the ecosystem, they're able to stay and embrace their skills as a profession. And that had a ripple effect, not just to them economically, but as you mentioned, in their family, and they become better mothers and present mothers.
Excellent. That's really interesting. So Shantanu, in your case, I guess the hypothesis that I would have is that the primary vector is through women as customers, right? Because at the end of the day, it's the pregnant women and their children that are really, that's how you're empowering them by being able to sort of, I don't know, take ownership and agency over their own health care. But can you talk a little bit more about that dynamic and how that works?
Yeah, I will also add a component of user in addition to the customer angle.
Oh, sure. Okay, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and that angle comes from, when Anya was speaking, I realized that almost 90 or more than 90% of our users are female. Because although we have gynecologists who are male, but primarily the nurses at the facility are female.
Right.
So our users are women.
Right.
It's close to 100% users.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
And
right.
It was very much discussed in various forums that the design of products have a lot of aspects of utility if we consider empathize with the user, and usage of the product is well defined on that angle. I think one of the aspects we learned over the period is to understand these users effectively and design our products accordingly.
Can you give an example of what you mean by that? Yeah.
I have actually various examples. I will give an example which covers both user and customer.
Okay.
So this is an interesting story in one of the village in Maharashtra state of India. We had first time brought fetal monitoring aspect into our whole antenatal or prenatal checkup journey, and usually in cultural barriers, first 3 months family would not let others know that a woman is pregnant. But in some contexts, they extend it to up till the point of delivery. Literally, the others in the family or doctors get to know that this woman is pregnant when she appears for the delivery. Now, when we started doing this prenatal checkups via our frontline health workers, this fetal monitoring was also offered along with the other aspect. Now, this is an interesting part to understand how experience, revolves the story. First time in their life, they heard the fetal heart sound. The test was performed at home in a remote village, and along with the fetal heart sound, of course, a proper non-stress test with the graph was generated. However, that heart sound element was so much important that the frontline worker could engage with the family so effectively. So the mother-in-law would have otherwise very different equation.
Yeah.
They got aligned. Now, this was the first test that happened in the second trimester. And later, the whole family, not just mother, but also, the would-be father and father-in-law and, all kids, all of them went to this frontline worker to test. And the primary reason was they want to hear that heart sound.
Yeah.
Now, this brought some inclusivity in terms of, even male candidates of the family came for this checkup. Otherwise, this would never happen in the geographic context I'm speaking. So this changed the perspective for the health worker who was using our product. She used this as a mechanism to attract more women to ensure that they come for checkup. And it created an effect in the society, which led to a kind of respect for this frontline worker as well. It got, families involved. If they are having pregnancies, they got an attractive point to do checkups. And it also included the, male partner and the, family members, which I saw a very interesting feedback that we got and stories that we got. So sometimes as designers or like product developers, we don't think about these angles. But yeah, user and customer aspects definitely involve the respect and dignity that frontline worker could get, experience that mothers could get, and most importantly, the health checkup which was required in the last mile that started happening along with this work.
Oh, that is so cool. That, yeah, I never
Yeah.
would have thought of that. But
Same here.
yeah, that's so, and it is powerful. I remember, you know, when I had my first child, like you hear that
Yeah.
heartbeat the
Yeah.
first time, it, you know, it
It
makes
is.
it real, right? It
Yeah,
makes,
it makes
yeah. So let's talk with you, Eka. I mean, you also have women as customers, but I don't know if there's, I'd like to hear about that. And if there's anything else that occurs to you in your business model.
Correct. So I thought about when Anya said greener pastures,
Hmm.
it made me think about all the women that we've worked, women farmers that we've worked with. So the way that we connect farmers to affordable financing is by providing them loans. And when you think about loans, right, when you think about like these kinds of things in financial sense, like it's about repayment.
Yeah.
And it's about, okay, how can you get their money back?
Yeah.
But what people don't recognize is that the way women think about their money is how they use it in the household. And it's like you don't put in a percent, like you don't say, oh, I've spent 50% of my profit
Mhm.
from selling my goods on my child.
Right.
Like you just give it
Yeah.
wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
And I think the way that we've been thinking about, you know, collections and the way we can think about empathizing with these women or like in our customers in general is really how do they think about their finances.
Mhm.
Like it's just not about selling it, it's also about where they spend it, what kinds of emergencies do they get. Women in particular are getting emergencies when they have a family member who's sick, a child who's sick, a
Yeah.
mother who's sick. Like they will invest in those things. And a lot of the times, like in the Philippines, it happens that women don't get to use their land or the land that they got from their parents because they need to earn more. They
Right.
have to go to those greener pastures. They have to make a livelihood. And so they take on these more formal jobs, like they go to the city, become household help, and they're just leaving the farms.
Yeah.
And that like has a tremendous gap on how much we're not utilizing the land, and at the same time, like we're not maximizing the potential of these women as farmers.
Mhm.
They do these like odd jobs that, you know, they can be good at it, but that's not gonna take them anywhere
Mhm.
else.
Yeah.
Whereas
Right.
if they continue the way that they farm or what they've known and since they were a kid,
Mhm.
then you're just upskilling them, right? You're investing in these women's potential.
Mhm.
And I feel like that's very important. And I don't think we really see that when we think about like the financial terms
Right.
of, you know, how can we invest?
Right, that's right. You know, one of the things that in our earlier conversation, I was really struck by the Equitable model, which is much more flexible in terms of repayment and aligning the repayment schedule to the cash flow.
Correct.
Instead of requiring immediate equal payments, you know,
Correct.
right after they get the loan. So
Yeah.
I'm imagining that that's also, I mean, that
That
would
was
help
part of the
yeah,
decision. Yeah,
right.
because the common model is like you would pay monthly payments,
Yeah.
right? We would our model like shifted so that we're on their cash flow. Like when they've sold their goods and they've paid for their expenses, that's when we come in.
They pay you
Yeah.
back. Yeah, yeah. And I think I would imagine, I mean, I guess that's probably equally useful for women and men, but it does make it easier probably for women.
Mm.
So we have, let's see, okay, Hetal, thanks for that, the cultural aspect on the health. I'm gonna go ahead and ask another couple of questions, but we'd really love to hear from you. You all out there on the screen, please let us know what are your questions or comments that you might have about these three amazing entrepreneurs and how they're advancing women's economic empowerment in a whole bunch of different ways. So let me go to you. Shantanu, what are the kinds of considerations that you make when you open up a new geography? So you talked about, you know, all these other geographies that you're going to. So how do you assess that? And do you take this kind of gender dimension into account when you're thinking about opening up a new market, say in Nigeria or somewhere? Yeah. How do you think about that?
naturally, one very important aspect for us is to understand the need of solutions, and which basically goes with the health indicators of maternal mortality and morbidity,
Yes, right.
which is very well imbibed with the life of women as well as the next generation. So that's like a primary indicator. Second, we also see the health infrastructure and very importantly, the health workforce.
Right.
You will be amazed to know that globally 70% of the health workforce are women.
Interesting.
So
I did not know that, but it makes sense, I
Yeah,
guess, because,
yeah.
yeah.
It sounds very logical, but I was like, okay, I also didn't know this.
Yeah.
But yes, that workforce is very important for us because as I mentioned earlier, our products are designed from that angle. Who are the users, how they are going to, convey that value of the product to the end mother ultimately, and how we link doctors as well. So geographically, the gender part comes definitely as a very basic element for us, that there are barriers in terms of women talking to male doctors as well.
Right, right.
Particularly exposing certain issues that they have, until and unless they are accompanied with someone who is comfortable in talking. So I have personally witnessed certain situations where women were not talking at all, and I also felt I shouldn't be there. I just walked away, and then the frontline worker and patient, like the women talked, and then they did check up. So these angles are very important to understand the adaptability of the solution, which ultimately means the impact that we can expect. So when we see that workforce, the need, the current infrastructure, that's the we decide that okay, this is the geography we should.
Yeah, the combination
Combination.
of those things. And can you speak a little bit about, you mentioned some of the cultural differences that you encounter, and then, obviously India is your, kind of beachhead market. It's what you know best.
Yeah.
And so what have been the challenges, and if you can specifically think about this gender kind of dimension, like what have been the challenges of moving to some of these other markets?
Yeah, so this is an interesting observation my operations manager Preeti gave to all of us. When we introduced our product in Nigeria, we did online training because of COVID. That was the only option, and she saw the whole enthusiasm coming from the women workforce the organization in Nigeria had. One interesting part we did. During COVID, we wanted to give right information to women in pregnancy, particularly COVID in pregnancy. These information we created in our, naturally in English, and then took help of local organization to translate into local languages. And we created a WhatsApp group because we felt that like the fastest way of spreading the information. The major cultural change I saw that when a safe, private, and medium was created for communication, a lot of women were asking a lot of questions on that platform. Otherwise, they were not asking and discussing. So I think using tech, digital aspects in a right way, creating that right platform for interaction, that was a great learning for us because
and equally useful in India, Nigeria.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So we during COVID we did one same activity in India. A lot of questions coming. Doctors were overwhelmed with that. Okay, look, we need to manage this effectively, and then we created an assistance to manage it. But same we saw, but the kind of questions asked in the Nigeria group versus the kind of questions asked in India group were different. That's the cultural difference came. I think we saw more outspoken, more direct questions from Nigerian women versus Indian women, which we saw a bit conservative approach. Which was very interesting too. And then we like, okay, the role that we can play is create that facility where they can talk and let it flow as the cultural value they see.
Yeah, that's interesting because even Anya, you were mentioning that even within the Philippines, there are
Yes.
very different
Context.
difference in context. You
Yes.
know, you talked about sort of urban slum or urban, you know, communities. You talked about indigenous communities, you talked about rural, and these are all like, obviously there's overlap, but I wonder if you can talk a little bit about this. I'm also really interested in the, you know, as a mother
Right.
and women as mothers, and thinking about, you know, Shantanu's story. I know that that's also a really big consideration for you. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the differences that you see.
Yeah.
And how you've adapted your model to be able to be flexible enough for women with different circumstances. And
Right.
Yeah.
I think the premise that we are mothers first before we are weavers is something that's common across all the different sectors that we work with.
Interesting.
But we actually had to learn that the hard way. And it was a very, very humbling moment in our enterprise. So initially, because we had all these vision for the company and we had a certain way of defining success in our own standards, we thought that when we achieve our certain impact metrics in terms of like increase in income, increase in productivity, increase in savings, that these women as mothers and as weavers are actually going to be very happy and be very happy with the partnership that we're able to provide this opportunity for them. However, interestingly, when we started to expand our production and our distribution, and we had like a physical store in Manila that was distributing for us the capital, and we doubled our requirement for inventory, which was supposed to be a good problem to have, right? Like, hey, we're all about increasing demand and we're providing them more opportunities for income. And we used to do this roll call of reporting income and savings reporting at the end of the year. But one mother raised her hand at the end of that reporting and said, I hope you're not forgetting that before we are weavers, we are mothers first. And that really, like, it was like, you know, getting splashed with cold water because I felt like we missed out in that conversation of what really is success to them. And what does it mean for them to become better mothers? And that really changed the way we did things. Like, that's really a shift in our business model. And from then on, we started anchoring our decisions on that knowledge, on that insight. And the way we do it now, like, we don't really impose for the women to work 8 hours a day. We're not a factory. A lot of these women work at the comforts of their own home because they want to be able to take care of their household. And there's also a lot of barriers depending on the context of where they're at. Like, mostly in urban households and in rural households, some of the husbands, the initially were not very supportive of women weaving. They felt probably intimidated by the idea or threatened by the idea that the women are not going to be fully present in the household anymore. But that also shifted in terms of like what Shantanu was saying, mindset of getting everyone in the household involved. When they started being able to increase income and contributed to household income and also had savings to buy essential goods, like as simple as a refrigerator so they can eat meat and fish. The men started appreciating that, okay, this is all, I'm benefiting from this, you know, this is good partnership.
Right.
And there's also that shift. When it comes to our indigenous communities, there's a lot of consultation with the elders in the process, and it's always honoring that communal spirit. So even with their income, a percentage goes to a community fund. So it really varies depending on the relationship we have with each community.
That's so interesting. You know, it occurs to me, you know, Eka, I know that you're primarily a lender, a financer, but you also offer a range of technical assistance and support. And so you do get pretty close to the farmers as well. And you also have both men and women farmers in you said 40% were women. So I'd be interested to hear, number one, like what what do you see as the key differences between the women and men farmers that you work with? And number two, does that affect the type of technical assistance or support, capacity building support that you deliver based on gender?
Well, the way that we provide support doesn't differ.
Mhm.
But what we've seen in terms of gender differences is really when you ask what are their needs are, like why do you need this amount of money, where will you invest it? Women will tend to will take less risks.
Yeah.
Just because they like, I can't make her payment because I will pay for XYZ.
Mm.
And we felt that that was such a big barrier for them to take on. Like, of course, if they take less risk or they feel afraid that they can't make her payments,
Yeah.
then they won't take on the amount or that they need for their farm. Whereas men are more, oh, okay, I'll take × 5 of this amount. And they'll just go on and on about it. And it's
Mm.
and sometimes it becomes, I feel like we've also found ourselves in a mode sometimes wherein you have agents who will ask women about the risk.
Yeah.
Like if they have children, like there's a perception
Mm.
that, okay, if you have children, you're not gonna make repayment, or because you're gonna pay for all these
Which
things.
is actually the opposite.
Which is actually the
Yeah,
opposite, right?
the reality is the opposite. You're touching on something so interesting, because we
Yeah.
find this also in the investing space, right?
Yeah,
That-
yeah.
That men will pitch the
Vision.
billion-dollar idea, the vision, and women will sort of say, well, let's see, what do I really have the capacity to
What's
repay?
feasible
What's
for me?
feasible? What is
Yeah.
my track record? What do I know how to do?
Yeah.
And similarly, that the investors will ask the male founders about the vision, and
Yeah.
and they'll ask the female founders about risks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
so-
happens in a
and
community
it's happening-
scale. Yeah.
So it's happening at every
Yeah.
level.
Yeah,
That would
for
seem to
sure.
be something we need to try to fix. So let's see what the questions are. Oh my goodness, yeah,
Lots
we
of
have. Oh yeah, and unfortunately, I can't see all the questions in the chat. I think Jeff is behind there trying to help. Wow, these are amazing questions. All right, so let's take the one about evaluation and monitoring. How do you assess, monitor, and evaluate the effectiveness? So this is kind of about the impact measurement and management and how you go about that. I'm sure that that might be of interest to more people. And then I'll ask Jeff to kind of suggest a couple of the key questions, since we can't see them all. They're starting to scroll up the screen for us. So let's start with that. I think that's really interesting. How do you
Yeah.
really know that you're empowering women with the work that you're doing?
Yeah, should I start?
Sure, go ahead.
I think it starts in-house. I feel the story really starts in your own company. Naturally, when we are talking about reaching out to women, how we are empowering them, and what is the outcome, and what is the sustainability approach. If in-house in a company we have that culture in place, that factors into our outreach, and that also factors into our outcomes. So put it more structural way of measuring. What we say is how many women employees we have in our company and what role they are playing. Second stage is how many of them are directly engaging with frontline workers and physicians and training them with the technology. So that in our case, the hypothesis is if we empower the healthcare providers with digital tools and technologies and skills, the quality of care to women, pregnant women, will increase. So
Nice.
yeah, so the quality of training and feedbacks of those trainings are very important for us. And going back to the same point of culture, when we are doing trainings in India versus doing training in Nigeria, it was a different experience. We learned our way. Okay, we need to redesign our trainings a bit and take feedbacks at every point. The third stage is actual usage of the product and the outcomes because of that. So naturally, in medical devices or healthcare delivery, there are ways to measure, and primarily aspects are you do observational studies or clinical studies. We did some observational studies, and we could demonstrate that if there are checkups happening in the first trimester, as well as there are more than 2 checkups happening in antenatal screening beyond the government checkups, we saw the prevalence of reduction in maternal mortality. But primarily we saw that preterm births as well as low birth weight condition reduced. And that happened all across geography. Are we the only one who contributed to all of this? No, but we could establish that, So end-to-end process can be monitored effectively. And I think once you are thinking throughout on the contributions of people, skills of people, utilization, economic outcome are given. I'm really not worried on that.
That's so interesting, because I didn't expect you to start inside the organization. I expected you to start with the health outcomes of the women. So I'm really, that's it.
We learned it.
Yes,
honestly.
that's very
Yeah.
nice. I like that
And
approach.
And it's really
Okay.
investing in your team. Like
Yes, and
we
your capacity
and your
also.
capacity.
Yes.
Like we do like these trainings on active listening, although we don't term it active listening, but it's kind of like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's about even having the men in the room, like
Get
listen,
perspective,
get
yes.
perspective, like ask questions.
Mm.
I feel like in the team, like more the women in our team ask more questions, less than the men. And I think it's a cultural thing sometimes it's a gender thing. But I think having that equal perspective or having that equal desire to ask more questions, because that's how you're gonna know your customer. That's how you're gonna know if you need these for the women or you need to make these changes.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so.
With us, I mean, similar to Shantanu, I think it really has to stem from inside, from internally. But I also wanted to say that there's always a temptation to kind of measure everything, which is not necessary. Like along the way, we've also learned to kind of simplify and be able to find focus, and it really is important for you. And with us, we anchor it back on our values and on our primary mission, and look at also what are the problems that we wanted to address. So like from the get-go, it was very clear for us initially that it was really around cultural preservation and cultural reclamation.
Right.
And we weren't looking at income yet and our savings because we were still building market demand. How can we measure income and savings if we're not giving them opportunities to sell their products yet? So initially we identified cultural continuity as something we want to measure. And how do we do that? Through our master and apprentice program. So we look at the ratio of young and old members. That was the first primary metric that we did. And it was easy because it was also incentivizing the master weavers to kind of get more of the young women, understand the relevance of learning and celebrating their craft and tradition. And then later on, when we were able to build the market, that's when we started looking at income and savings. And then as we evolved, we also looked at the value and the contribution of fashion and environmental protection. So now we are big on circularity and we're upcycling tons of textile waste. And we look at environmental waste, like how much we've upcycled. So
that's interesting.
Evolves.
So it evolves over time too. So even though fundamentally your vision is the same, but the way you can measure different things kind of evolves as you gain experience. That's really interesting. So Jeff, can you
we have some,
roll up? There are lots of
we have some
interesting
questions coming in from the chat. So let me share one from Christopher. And this could be for any of the panelists. It says, how are panelists engaging and partnering with customers on an ongoing basis? What does the communication and engagement process look like with customers?
How do you go? You want to go?
Yeah, I can give it a go.
You have something to say there.
Because I think communication is foundation really of building like a good relationship.
Yeah, sure,
And
of course.
I would say I wouldn't say there's like a proper process or like a cookie cutter solution to how to do these things, but I feel like it's so important to invest in presence and build trust. And so just being on the ground, like the pandemic really has been quite a challenge because we're not able to do field work, but being there on the ground and really, making your presence felt and not kind of coming in with an agenda, but really just to facilitate a safe space for open dialogue. That's something that has really worked effectively for us, where we don't kind of dominate holding the microphone and just talking about our plans and what we want to do and this is how we're going to grow big, you know, but really getting them to just tell their stories and allow themselves to kind of honor their voice.
Yeah,
So that's kind
nice.
of primary, getting their ideas. So we facilitate a lot of like design thinking process, even within the community, a lot of brainstorming within the community. That's where how we're able to facilitate co-creation, because they actually have the solutions. And a lot of indigenous communities, their indigenous knowledge is so rich and it's so simple and basic, and but it like solves a problem more than like what we do or what we think we know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
How about Eka? I'd like to
Yeah.
hear from you as
Like,
well. That's really interesting.
So our model, we actually send field officers. Our field officers are actually within the communities they work with, and so we make it a point like if you're gonna be serving, we're gonna be operating in this area, we need to have someone who is there 24/7. Like if they have, not even if, like they have to go to each of these farmers' households and like you have to learn about their family. You have to know like how many kids they have. You have to know like those are the kinds of things we require our field officers to know beyond like, okay, how can they repay? You have targets and all
Right,
that. Because they need to be engaged and they have to be able to understand where the customer is coming from. And we spend a lot on just trying to train them to like listen to these problems. Yeah.
I want to add something
Yeah, go
quickly.
ahead.
Sorry. It's also very important to also build a leadership and governance structure within these artisan communities.
Yeah.
So, because you can't talk to everyone all at the same time. So we have an elder or a community elder, but we primarily talk with a community manager.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting about what I'm hearing from all of you is this notion of relational communication versus transactional,
Yeah.
right?
Yes,
So,
yep.
you know, it's easier for, you know, investors and others sometimes to only think about the transactional and what's going on with the business and the balance sheet and all that. But you're all very much aligned in this concept of relational and the importance of relational communication as well. I know, Shantanu, do you want to add something about the communication process that you have and how you relate to customers?
Yeah, I think no difference of
Yeah.
thought or here. When we center our thoughts about our users or customers, it's more about how we create value for them.
Mhm.
And we have to go deeper to understand that. And one of the very interesting activity we did last year was, you know, it was kind of an activity for understanding sustainable competitive advantage.
Yeah.
However, when we learned various aspects, we were always trying to position how our product is great, how
Right.
it has got great tech stuff. We ended up with one word of the value: convenience.
Convenience.
And
Interesting.
yeah, and we saw that when we started talking around that word, we could relate and connect effectively.
Yes.
Because our product was bringing convenience to frontline worker, nurse, pregnant women, and a gynecologist. You know, with a lot of other dimension attached to it.
Sure.
But finally, it came to that one single word, and there is a value that you are sharing. And we realized that most of the customers who paid and using our product to a good level are valuing this one.
That feature. Yeah, that
Yeah.
specific feature,
Yeah.
like really. dialing
Language
in.
is so powerful in communication. Like we emphasize so much on the word partnership. Like we're not your employers, we're your partners. These small shifts, I feel, make so much difference. Like they're not just weavers, they're craft entrepreneurs. And I think there's a lot of difference with language and communication.
Yeah, and what about in agriculture sector?
I think you
What
have
do
to
of
think
it?
about how technology can enable that for your company. I feel like a lot of that is, you know, when you want to talk to your field office, like especially in a pandemic, right? What are the kinds of technologies you can invest in to make their work easier so that you can continue
Yep.
that work of looking at convenience, right? Because we tend to focus on, okay, how can technology make it the company times 10?
Right.
But you don't think about infrastructure, especially in emerging markets, is really a challenge because you're gonna lose that aspect of community and like knowing the customer. You're just gonna focus on, okay, how can we build this amazing tool that
Right.
no one knows how to use and maximize.
Which happens.
Yeah,
Which actually happens on the ground. a lot.
Exactly. And you know, this is really bringing to the surface another set of conversations that I've been having this week during our in residence, which is this delicate trade-off between growth and especially rapid growth and culture. You know, how do you retain the culture? Because that's essentially what you guys are talking about, right?
Yes.
It's the kind of culture that you're creating in your companies that enable you to relate to your customer, the value chain, the users, and whatever, you know, in a way that's relevant for them, in this case, to, you know, to women. And so I think that is really, it is a challenge, right? As you get bigger and bigger.
Let's see if we can get to a couple other questions.
Yeah, I actually
So-
also have it. I
Yeah.
want to talk to them about being women leaders as well towards the end.
Ah,
So
okay,
just give me a
okay.
few minutes at the end there for that. All right.
Okay.
So what's another question that we have on the board here, Jeff?
Yeah, so we have a question asking whether there are any kind of standard measures or metrics for women's economic empowerment, and if there are, what are they? Can you name a few?
I think we had a couple of examples during NRS. When it
Yeah.
comes to economic empowerment, it's really strategic to look at income and savings.
Saving.
I would add a different dimension of health.
Yeah.
Yes, well-being.
There are, studies, evidences, but a lacking common sense that if you invest in women health and well-being, there is a great socio-economic development.
Yeah.
And it does not limit to women only. It helps the whole society.
Yes.
Yes. for
And
sure.
if you think very simply, a woman who takes care of their family, if she is well, the family is healthy, they eat good food, women and rest of the family can work, and ultimately it helps in, from a larger context perspective, and which was well established in various numbers and studies. So the question of women economic empowerment, investing in women health will definitely lead to, women and societal economic environment as well.
Like another metric is also like how many kids were they able to support when they were being invested in. Like I think with healthcare, for example, that's always a great case. Like if the children survived or if they were nutritious, they were eating nutritious food. It's similar in agriculture where you're looking at how many children were sent to school. Are they fed well? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it feels like there's like sort of first order and then second order metrics. And at Miller Center, we're developing a library of indicators for women's economic empowerment, as well as climate resilience. And of course, there's some interesting overlaps between those two.
Is that going to be available to
I'm not sure exactly how that is available. I'm gonna have to like get back to people on that. I know that it's definitely available to the Miller Center alumni, but we use the IRIS database
Yes.
To look at that. But one thing I was interested in that both of you really immediately said savings. And that might not be an obvious one to everyone here. Can you say more about why that would be sort of a proxy indicator for women's economic empowerment?
We saw that as something that's worth monitoring or looking at. Actually, it's very valuable to look at savings because a lot of the communities we work with, especially artisans, their primary challenge is debt, and being able to repay that debt. And also, when we were able to kind of increase the demand for their products, we encounter this lottery syndrome, like, this one day billionaire, and suddenly I am overwhelmed because I have so much money and then I spend it because I'm not financially literate. So I think the financial literacy aspect to these programs is so important because they're not able to sustain that income, or they're not able to improve their quality of life if they don't know how to manage their savings and their income. So we look at that, and in our program, we have a criteria of how and when they can use their savings. So if it's for an educational investment, another entrepreneurial venture, if it's for health, and if it's for emergency or home and a home improvement. And we've seen it. That's one indicator we look at, like where do they use their savings
Right.
also. And for example, during the pandemic, the beauty of our program is we were able to release their savings in full when the pandemic happened because it was emergency, a situation of an emergency. And it helped them pivot to other entrepreneurial ventures. When they weren't able to weave, they invested and went back to farming. They bought poultry, raised goats, cows.
Right.
So I think that actually extends the income, not just limited to what you're doing with weaving alone, but it prepares them for resiliency.
Exactly. I think I was just going to say something about, vulnerability and the relationship between poverty and vulnerability, right? Because, oftentimes at the high level, you hear people talk about, people making less than whatever, $2 a day or $5 a day, but that doesn't mean that they're making $2 or $5 each and every single day. It's this really volatile kind of sources. And so helping people to sort of take, control of their financial lives and be the architects of their own future and all that kind of stuff, I think is what I'm hearing here. Listen, I'd like to just take a couple minutes and just ask you, Eka, and you, Anya, and I'm sure you may have some views as well, but I would like to hear what are the unique challenges of being a woman entrepreneur in your context, and opportunities, maybe challenges and opportunities. So what has been your experience?
Well, like the agricultural sector is a very male dominant industry, and so a common challenge is really like they put you in a corner where you have to be masculine, like you have to project yourself, you have to show dominance. I guess that's how usually it comes, like you have to be more aggressive, but then you would receive backlash. It's like you're being too aggressive. That's a common challenge that I feel happens to many women, because it's either they're being asked to be dominant or suddenly they become too dominant or obnoxious.
Interesting.
I think for me, within the context of business or like investment or pitching to investors, I think sometimes the challenge is that creativity is undervalued or is seen as a soft skill.
Right, I see. Like
and
artistic creativity.
and even the artisans feel that, and it's hard. Like as a leader, I have to always really embrace and be confident and really embrace the value of creativity and the arts and culture and these living traditions, and also invest so much time in ensuring that our stakeholders feel that, because they could feel very insecure about what they know and what their skills can do, or the potential of their skills. So that primarily, like, you're having to kind of prove that the craft entrepreneurship or a craft business can scale. And I'm really, really grateful to be able to meet other entrepreneurs in the Miller Center that are within the craft enterprises that are able to actually scale, because that's kind of the mindset. It's hard to scale craft businesses.
That's right. Shen, did you have any observations?
Absolutely. I think it is a very important topic, women leading from front. And my challenge was how I make that comfortable for women employees in my company. And very first thing, we did was have gender equality policy. Now, these policies are made many times, but do you really understand them? And I try to put an attempt to that, honestly. I think sympathizing and understanding the strength of women, I think that really empowered me as a leader to understand that actually we have a lot of biases and we should remove them. That respect and engagement, we saw kind of a value where few of the women employees, they came and said, look, because of this flexibility and this, so policy word was never used. They said, because of this flexibility and the respect we are getting, we are open to work, with much more motivation. And so they get the flexibility from various requirements, women usually have. And because of that, they would work late night, or they would just find the time and ensure they finish it. That was so amazing to see. That doesn't mean I want them to work late night.
Yeah.
Just to clarify.
It's because it fit their schedule better.
yeah,
Is what you're saying. Yeah.
Because
Flexible.
managing kids for their
Yeah.
school,
Yes.
some other work at home, and they find time. So what was inspiring for me, that whatever it is, they were managing it. They were ensuring that they finish their work. Also.
Delivered.
It's not easy, and I feel just being aware about this also helps a lot.
Well, you know what? We need men. who
Yeah.
get this too. It's
Yeah.
not just about women talking to each other.
I love what Shantanu said, because my co-founders are male.
Uh-huh.
But they've given me space, like
Yeah.
exactly what Shantanu is saying, like they've given me space to be able to speak. And when I speak, they don't interrupt me. I mean, those are concrete things you could do when you're a male
Yes.
founder, when you have a female co-founder. It's like, you don't interrupt them. You give them space to lead. You let them, when they're talking, like in front of a crowd, you let them present.
Yeah.
And have their moment, right?
That's great.
And I think part of that is also acknowledging the feminine energy of when you're the guy, and like having to acknowledge that energy of like, I'm okay to be vulnerable to you as a co-founder, like telling you my challenges, like not presenting like I've got everything.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
That's
I
right.
felt I've appreciated that from my co-founders, because they're very open to me.
That's great.
And I think that's something that people don't recognize a lot when they're
Yeah.
in these kinds of teams.
Well, we definitely need more of that kind of energy and interaction. And I think, something that we often hear, and especially in the financing or the impact investing space, or, that it's kind of dominated by a certain type of culture and a certain, kind of male energy. And, the answer is not that women need to act more like men.
Yeah.
And that should never be the message that we're providing to the women
Yes.
entrepreneurs. It should be, how can we work together to change this system
Right.
to become more inclusive and accepting of women as equal partners in this endeavor, as we are all trying to, end global poverty and protect the planet. So thank you to everyone. We've gone a few minutes over. There's so many questions here. What a great conversation. And I do believe that we have, we've recorded this conversation so that we can also send it out to, I know there were a number of people who signed up who weren't able to make it. But thanks again. Thanks to Jeff for organizing it. And thank you, Eka, Anya, and
having us.
Shantanu.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.